Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's video as we're going to discuss some of my winners and losers through free agency. We're going to take a look at a lot of the deals that have been signed. Now, very important to note, I am recording this on Monday, July 3rd at around 7 p.m. Central Time or so, which means that there could be some crazy things that happen. At this point when I'm recording, there's been no Damian Lillard trade, there's been no James Harden trade, which would obviously shake up our free agency winners and losers quite a bit, but we're going to talk about some of the moves that we've seen thus far. If you are new to Utility Sports, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content as well so you don't miss out on future uploads. Hit that little notification bell and click all. And without further ado, let's jump into free agency here. Shout out to Spot Track. We're going to use Spot Track here just to make it easier and look at what every single team's done. It's sorted by alphabetically. So let's take a look at the Brooklyn Nets. I like keeping Cam Johnson here on a reported 4-year, $108 million deal. $27 million annually is about what I would value him at myself. I thought in free agency he potentially could have gotten a bigger offer from a different team, say a Detroit Pistons, but they went out and made a move, taking in Joe Harris's contract to also pick up a couple of second-round picks, thus limiting them in free agency this offseason. So Cam Johnson sticks on what I think is a pretty reasonable deal. Could have expected him to have gotten more. Ultimately stays in Brooklyn here on, I think, a pretty well-valued deal. One that works out very well for them. And I really do like their other additions as well. They take Lonnie Walker and Dennis Smith Jr., two former first-round picks. Of course, Dennis Smith Jr. was a lottery selection with the Dallas Mavericks in the year 2017. And now at this point, he signs on for the minimum, which I think is really good value. Dennis Smith Jr. last year had some of the best defensive numbers in the NBA, and I know that might sound crazy. That might sound like, oh, whoa, that's an overreaction. No, it's not. On players who've defended over 500 field goals this past season, Dennis Smith Jr. was second among all qualifying guards from NBAstats.com in his actual defensive acumen and defensive field goal percentage allowed. So I think Dennis Smith Jr., Lonnie Walker as well, brings some nice athleticism from the guard position. Brooklyn, I think, two good upside swings here at the guard spot that makes sense. I think Dennis Smith Jr. is someone who can actually play himself into a pretty consistent role there with the Nets. Going on to Boston, I have liked their signings. They brought in two younger players as well, O'Shea Brissett, Delano Banton. The one, of course, that's going to pop off the screen here is Delano Banton. I think a very worthwhile pickup for them, especially given the fact that they traded away Marcus Smart. Delano Banton ranked in the 96th percentile as a cutter last year as a play finisher. So you're looking at somebody who you're going to probably ask him to play off the ball next to Tatum and Brown and Porzingis a decent amount when he's actually on the floor. He's a good tempo pusher. He's got a big frame for a point guard. And because of that, I think Boston's getting an intriguing player. Now, I don't know how much he's going to play this next year for them. Maybe see him with the main Celtics a bit, but ultimately I think he's an upside swing that makes some sense. Miles Bridges signs his cap hold. He's one of my big losers here for the Charlotte Hornets because there was no real market for him. A player who a year ago in free agency, a lot of people expected to sign for massive amounts of money, north of $20 million a year. Now at this point, missed a season. He's suspended for the first 10 games this next year, but he's actually pretty smart for taking the qualifying offer in my opinion because it helps him serve his suspension. It's going to get him back out on the basketball court, and because of that, he's going to probably find himself in a role with Charlotte, I would presume. And off of that, he'll be an unrestricted free agent next year, which could lend itself to Charlotte being the longtime losers here. Not getting an extension done with the Hornets, I do think puts a little bit of pressure on the franchise to potentially lose him a year from now. Kobe White, this is a really good deal. 3 years, $33 million is what Shams Charania reported. Woj reported 3 years for $40. I believe that has to do with guarantees and also just the overall potential incentives in there. So Kobe White, I think this is a good team-friendly deal. I like it for Chicago, who also got Javon Carter, Torrey Craig. For them, they were looking for a little bit more guard play, given the fact that Lonzo Ball likely will not play this upcoming season. Overall, I think they've done a very good job. Carter and Craig, good signings. Now, I don't think it moves the needle enough. For Chicago, I think they need a lot of bigger things to happen. Potentially a Zach LaVine trade. We could still see roped into a Harden or Dame trade. We'll see what happens there. But all in all, I've liked their additions for the most part in a vacuum. And we go into the Cavaliers, and this is kind of a mixed bag. Ty Jerome, solid signing. He's a good player at the point guard spot. George Niang, a good player, shoots the ball very well. Karis LeVert, solid player, right? And Max Strus, again, another shooter, which these are all things Cleveland needed. I think Cleveland got a lot better, but I wouldn't necessarily classify them as winners, and part of the reason why is I just feel like all of these deals outside of the Ty Jerome one are a little bit richer than maybe what I would have been willing to give. Karis LeVert, $16 million a year, I feel a little apprehensive about. Now, the one selling point there is it's a short-term deal, only 2 years. I can talk myself into that. But then you look at George Niang, 3 for 26. I would have probably been a little bit closer to the $5 million a year mark. Typically, when you get to the playoffs, George Niang, someone who falls out of the rotation. At least that's what's happened up to his career so far when you look back to what he was in Utah and Philadelphia. In Cleveland, will it be a different story? I don't know. They had to get rid of Cedi Osman. So I think that they did upgrade. Max Strus, I think, a good upgrade. But again, is he worth $15.75 million a year? That's tougher for me to understand and rationalize. So I think all the players they got are good. They needed to get players like the players that they got. Although I think that they spent a little bit more than they should have. And it also sacrificed them Cedi Osman and a few other things in the process. Dallas, I would say, a pretty good free agency period for them. Kyrie Irving, keeping him. One of the worst things that could have happened this offseason for Dallas was losing Kyrie Irving for nothing. So the fact that they kept him on a non-4-year deal, pretty good. Now, there is a player option in that 3rd year. If Kyrie Irving decides to not pick up that player option, I think Dallas will be fine with that. A 2-year deal would be just fine for Kyrie Irving nonetheless. Bring back Dwight Powell, 3 years, 12. Doesn't make any sense, though. I'm not a fan of this for Dallas. Bringing in Seth Curry in the biannual exception is phenomenal. We know he's already a good fit with Luka Doncic. The two of them played very, very well together early in Luka's career. And I think Seth Curry, a quick, snappy decision maker who can shoot the basketball from well beyond the arc, I think offers good length when it comes to floor spacing, not actual length defensively, but floor stretching. That's what Seth Curry brings, and I think that's a pretty good, useful skill for Dallas. They haven't had a lot of shooting, so you see Seth Curry and Kyrie Irving reunite together now in Brooklyn, and in Dallas, excuse me, and I like it quite a bit for the Mavs. Reggie Jackson, DeAndre Jordan, and Justin Holiday for Denver. I understand DeAndre Jordan, good veteran presence at this point, did give them a few meaningful minutes in the playoffs this past year, which I was not expecting. Reggie Jackson, I was kind of surprised to see him get this contract at 2 years over $10 million. I thought that would probably have been reserved for Jeff Green. They decided to go with Reggie Jackson instead. And then Justin Holiday, I think a good vet minimum signing. For me, though, I think losing Jeff Green is a big loss. So I think that they're going to have to make up for that. Of course, they lost Bruce Brown as well. So this team right now, I would classify as losers, but I think they have the infrastructure to probably surround the young guys. Christian Brown, you're also going to see Peyton Watson play more. They also had a pretty nice draft, in my opinion, of players who, like Julian Strawther, can step in right away and fill some roles and play some minutes. I think that, all in all, Denver, they got worse, but I think that they're not going to be much worse of a team, if that makes sense. Detroit here, I haven't really loved their offseason, but I understand that they're kind of rolling things over, trying to get some fits. They brought in Monte Morris. They also brought in a player in Joe Harris. So they got players who fit, some veteran leadership presence in that locker room, which is good. Obviously they have the pathway to go out and spend. They decide not to do that. They have flexibility next year. They have a bunch of expiring contracts. So ultimately, I don't want to be too harsh on Detroit. They didn't really accomplish a ton for this upcoming season, but I think it's going to be about growth and development. I can't really classify them as winners or losers because of that. We go into Golden State, and I think they're relatively big winners for free agency, keeping Draymond Green at 4 years, $100 million. It's about what the contract I would have been willing to give Draymond Green is. I think it's very good value. Getting Corey Joseph, not a huge addition, but I think a solid veteran. Probably not going to play a ton for you. They do have some other players now in the backcourt. Chris Paul, of course. Brandon Pajemski, just to name a couple. I think that Golden State at this point had a good offseason for the most part. I think that they got better for this upcoming year. Now, there is going to be some long-term downfalls to what they did this offseason as well, but I don't think I would classify them as huge winners. I think that they just had a solid offseason. Going on to the Houston Rockets, and now this is going to be the most controversial. Let's look at who they signed and who they brought in. Fred VanVleet on massive money. 3 years, $130 million roughly. Dylan Brooks on 4 years, $80. Jock Landale on 4 years, $32. Now only the first year of that is guaranteed at $8 million, so that's really not that bad of a contract. Jeff Green, 1 year, $6 million, and they also kept the two-way status on both Darius Days and Trevor Hudgens, which I think are pretty good players to have on two-way deals. Houston, a lot of people are going to classify as losers. They're going to say, oh, you overpaid Fred VanVleet, you overpaid Dylan Brooks, you overpaid Jock Landale. For me, I would say the Houston Rockets are slight winners. Now, here's the thing. Houston is very, very young. they need veteran presence. And of course, that's such an easy blanket statement to say of, oh yeah, of course they got the right veterans, in my opinion, because this team has been a YMCA defense for the last 3 years now, averaging over 120 points allowed per game in that stretch. And I think ultimately with Fred VanVleet, Dillon Brooks, you're getting two very, very good defensive players. VanVleet always toward the top of the league in steals. We know what Dillon Brooks is defensively as a guy who's willing to be up to the challenge to get on the floor for loose balls, defend the other team's best player. I think he's going to set a precedent for those young guys, and I think Amen Thompson specifically, who they just drafted 4th overall, is going to fit into that blend as well of what VanVleet and Brooks do as good defensive playmakers, guys who want to be competitive and defend. The Rockets are going to be significantly better next season. Now, does that mean they're a playoff team? Maybe not, but the nice thing here with VanVleet is it's not too long. You're not committed to him too long. And Dillon Brooks at 4 years, $80 million. Listen, the new TV deal that's going to come in, the mid-level exception is going to be around $17, $18 million from what I project in a few years. So when you're looking at the back end of this Brooks deal, I know people are surprised about that $20 million a year mark. That's what he was on pace to earn before the playoffs. Now, the playoffs, a lot of people kind of guesstimated that his value went down. The Rockets had to overbid to get him because I'm sure he had some contenders willing to pay him toward that mid-level exception this year. But getting him, again, sets a precedent for the team. Ime Udoka needs some defensive players to work with. And people are going to be dragging Houston through the coals. I actually think Houston did a pretty good job this offseason, especially given the fact that a lot of these deals are not going to overlap with the rookie extensions of some of their other guys like Jabari Smith, Jalen Green, and who knows? We don't even know if those players are worth giving a rookie max extension to yet at this point, despite being top 3 picks. Like, the Rockets here need to start winning first, need to start putting a good basketball product on the floor, and Rockets fans, you're going to get to watch some competitive basketball this year for the first time in quite a while. The Pacers, I think, are massive winners. They signed Bruce Brown. They also traded for Obi Toppin, which I really, really liked, only giving up 2 second-round picks to land a former lottery selection from the New York Knicks. I think was really, really good for them. I think he perfectly fits that team as a transition player, someone who's got a big, strong physical body but jumps out of the gym. As a Dayton Flyer fan myself, I'm enamored with Obi Toppin, and I think in a bigger role he's going to be able to showcase a lot. I do like their rookies that they drafted as well in Jarris Walker, Ben Shepherd, but then when you look at Bruce Brown, and everyone was freaking out about the money. First of all, the second year is a team option, so it's really a 1-year usage of cap space. If you're Indiana, if you look at this roster, they didn't need to bring in 3 or 4 veteran players. They didn't need to bring in 2 or 3 contributors. They have a lot of pieces that are worthy of playing time. That what they needed was one guy who fit their team well, and that's exactly what Bruce Brown Jr. is. Think about Indiana now. They have a bunch of guys who can handle the basketball. I think Ben Shepherd's going to grow in that role. Tyrese Halliburton, of course, is the supernova of the team, the guy who's at the center of everything for them. But then Bruce Brown, another playmaker, averaged around 4 assists a game last year for Denver. I think outside of that, though, how does he fit around Halliburton? He screens, he cuts, he defends, he hits the offensive glass, he knocks down corner threes. Those are all useful skills that are going to apply themselves to Indiana. Because of that, I think the Pacers are going to do quite well next season. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to guarantee a playoff run or not, but I think that they're a team that is significantly better. And Bruce Brown, their cap management was perfect this offseason, in my opinion. I think that contract is fair because of how short-term it is. The Clippers, at this point, I think they're a team that could definitely shake some things up. They've brought in Russell Westbrook and Mason Plumlee back. That was a big challenge for them to get both of them back. I think already deserves an A+, just because I was a little skeptical on them being able to keep Russ at that small mark of $3.8 million annually. They were able to get that done, so kudos to them. They also got Plumlee back. Now, I think that there is going to be an eventual James Harden addition to this roster too, which is going to completely flip free agency on its head for the LA Clippers. So we're going to keep our eyes on what that looks like for them. There's a lot that can change, but I do like where the Clippers are at currently, and I think that keeping those players was really pivotal for them. I'd classify them as small winners. The Lakers, massive winners. The Lakers had a very, very, very good free agency period for themselves. I really liked what they did this offseason so far, getting Austin Reeves on a phenomenal number, 4 years, $56 million. I was very worried about the possibility of a Gilbert Arenas provision type contract for Austin Reeves this offseason, where the first 2 years would be $12 million annually. The final 2 years would be north of $30 million, making it very tough for the Lakers to keep their long-term financial flexibility. They were able to get him on a much friendlier deal. They gave him pretty much all of the bells and whistles possible on that 4 years, $56 million deal, but it's really good for their long-term flexibility. Because of that, they were able to keep Rui Hachimura. Now, I think he's slightly overpaid here at 3 years, $51. I would have been more comfortable around the $12 to $13 million annually mark instead of $17 million. But with all the other moves, I still think they're big winners here. D'Angelo Russell, they got on a fair value at about $18.5 million annually. You look at Gabe Vincent, that was a home run signing for them. I think he's going to fit very well next to LeBron James. I think he does a lot of the winning things you need out of guard play next to LeBron and Anthony Davis. Cam Reddish, I think, is a good upside signing. Wouldn't expect him to hit, wouldn't expect him to be in the rotation come February, but at the end of the day, if you're going to take an upside swing on somebody, former lottery pick Cam Reddish is a guy that does make some sense for me there. And then Jackson Hayes, I do think is a very good signing as well. Athletic, big, rim presence, lob catcher, protects the rim a bit. I think those are all things you're looking to kind of pair next to LeBron James as well as a screen and roll guy. And because of that, I think that those are all really nice signings. And you add in the fact that they got Taurean Prince on that biannual exception number, $4.5 million. Very, very good contract for them. I think Taurean Prince, a guy who I was pretty surprised to see Minnesota waive at $7.5 million. I classify him as a $7 to $10 million player. They got him at $4.5 for the chance to compete for a title this year. The Lakers, huge winners this offseason. If I had to give them a grade, it would be an A+. Even though I'm not in love with that Hachimura number, I think all in all, they had a very, very, very good free agency period thus far. Then you go on to the Grizzlies, who they've made some moves. Derrick Rose makes some sense for them as a mentor in that locker room. I've heard him classified as a good locker room presence, a good locker room guy. You're not going to get a ton on-court production. Now, I think he will play a bit for the Grizzlies, especially during Ja Morant's suspension, but I think just the vocal leadership in the locker room is really why they signed him. It's a good signing. The Heat, I think they've done very, very well as well when you look at their minimum players that they brought in. They also got Drew Smith on a two-way contract. You look at Kevin Love, keeping him in below that biannual exception number. Very good contract again in that situation. Josh Richardson, getting him back on the minimum. I was pretty surprised by that. I thought he might have been a biannual exception player as well. So, you know, bringing him back to Miami, really solid move. And of course, there's always going to be the looming question of where does Damian Lillard go? Will Damian Lillard be a Miami Heat? And if so, it really does drastically change how their offseason goes. Jaime Jaquez is looking like a really nice player so far through the first half of his summer league game. So I think ultimately the Heat are in a very strong spot going forward. Of course, they were just in the Eastern Conference Finals and the NBA Finals. I think the Heat are going to be a nice team. The Bucks, I don't know if I necessarily classify them as winners, but they're not losers. They had a pretty solid offseason for themselves. Keeping Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez was at the top of their priority. They also brought Robin Lopez in here too, so now they have the Lopez brothers back together again, which I like to see. It's going to be, you know, a little bit of good camaraderie there in that locker room, which is nice. And I think they got Middleton at a pretty fair number. Maybe a little bit richer than what I would have loved to give him, but I think it's not bad. Brook Lopez, I think, is an overpay, but the nice thing is the term isn't that bad. So for the same reason why I wasn't harsh on the Dillon Brooks contract as much, $24 million isn't outrageous, especially for me, someone who I believe Brook Lopez should have been the Defensive Player of the Year this past season. He defended over 300 more shots than any other player in the league. He had a negative 4.4 differential percentage, which is really, really incredible. And I think ultimately for Milwaukee, Brook Lopez, Chris Middleton, those are two players you had to have back to at least appease Giannis and say, look, we're trying to win still. We're trying to compete for championships. And I think the Bucks go into next season with a real shot to potentially win one. Go on to the Minnesota Timberwolves. And this is one of the big offseason losers for me. I just do not understand their free agency plan other than saving money. That's really all you can classify it here with Shake Milton, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Troy Brown Jr. Of course, there's already some concerns. They extended Anthony Edwards, which is really one of the most important things. So kudos to them for getting that done. That had to get done. They're also going to extend at some point Jaden McDaniels, at least I would assume. And that's going to be a pretty rich deal, probably $30+ million a year. And I know that might sound crazy to you. Trust me, he's going to get more than Cam Johnson just signed for at $27 million a year, and he deserves it. He should get more than that. But when it comes to Minnesota here, like, because of those big contracts, and Cat's going to escalate to a Supermax next year, and Rudy Gobert obviously on a big one, the Wolves are kind of strapped long term. So because of that, they decided to waive Taurean Prince, and instead of using the mid-level exception for one player, it seems like here they decided to split their money up across a few guys. Shake Milton, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Troy Brown Jr. They got Luka Garza back on a two-way, which is pretty good. You know, I just, none of these players move me a ton. I like Nickeil. Shake Milton's solid, but I don't know. He's better than Jordan McLaughlin. Like, this team didn't get that much worse, but I think they were a team that they were positioned to probably take a decent step forward if they did everything correctly this offseason. But I just don't really think that I'm moved by them, and because of that, I'm going to put them in the losers category. The Pelicans here really like what they did. They got Herb Jones on a great contract. Bringing in Cody Zeller, that's fine. Doesn't move the needle a ton for me, but getting Herb Jones on that number, perfect. Great contract. The exact same situation essentially is what happened with Austin Reeves. The Knicks, getting Dante DiVincenzo, perfect fit. The Villanova Knicks are going to be really fun to watch. They just need Mikal Bridges to round the whole thing out. But DiVincenzo, really great signing for them. It was pretty clear the Warriors were going to lose him just based on the financial difficulties that that team was presented with in trying to keep DiVincenzo compared to what other teams could offer him. And because of that, the Knicks jumped in. I projected them to be the team to land DiVincenzo, and ultimately that's exactly where he went. The Thunder here, quiet offseason. They've mostly used their cap space to acquire other players through trade. I believe Patty Mills is now in Oklahoma City, although it feels like he's been traded 4 times now this offseason. But I do think that Vasily Micic is really important to talk about here. I think he's going to make the Thunder a lot better. I think he's actually going to be a really nice compliment. Then you also have to throw in the fact that Chet Holmgren is going to be healthy this season and he's going to play. The Thunder are in a much better position going forward. They're a likely, I'm not even going to say like, they're a lock to make the playoffs this upcoming season. I like the Magic's offseason as well here. Joe Ingles, Mo Wagner. People are going to say, oh, Joe Ingles overpaid. They use the mid-level. It has nothing to do with their cap room or anything, and had no impact on any of that. They got him for the mid-level price. That's what I projected Joe Ingles to go for. He offers some range shooting, still can play make, offers some decent size still. The Magic, I think Joe Ingles is a perfect mentor to Jet Howard as well, which is important to note, and to Franz Wagner as well in a certain extent. So I think Ingles really good addition to that team. Patrick Beverley to the Sixers, good. I think the Sixers right now are to be determined though, depending on that James Harden situation. I'm not going to rule out James Harden coming back to the Sixers. I think that is a realistic possibility. Although if Harden does get traded, my expectation currently is he goes to the Los Angeles Clippers. The Phoenix Suns here now, another team that did about as great as they could have. I think really the signing I want to highlight the most is Yuta Watanabe. I think really good addition, fantastic corner shooter. I think a really good team defender, instinctual, smart, understands how to step in, take a charge, do a lot of winning things for a team. And Phoenix needs more of those players around those 3 stars there in Beal, Booker, and Durant. I think Yuta Watanabe is going to be a hard guy to keep off the floor next to those 3. Okogie does a lot of those things as well. So those 2 guys probably going to be candidates to play a good amount of minutes this year for Phoenix. I like some of the size swings too that they made. Drew Eubanks, Chimezie Metu, 2 players who I think have roles in this league. Eubanks more of a rim protector. Metu offers that to a certain extent, but he's also got a pretty nice right hook that he likes to go to as a post-up guy. Not that you're going to feed him a ton, but if you're looking at Eubanks and Metu to be kind of your second and third center, which is what they currently project to be behind DeAndre Ayton, those are exactly what you're hoping them to be. And I think Eubanks with Frank Vogel is going to find a lot of success there. Keita Bates-Diop, a really good play finisher, took a huge step forward as a shooter over the last couple of years as well. He's a really intriguing player. I think if there's a player on this list that likely closes games for the Suns next to those big 3 stars and DeAndre Ayton, my assumption would probably be Keita Bates-Diop at this point. Eric Gordon, he's the big name. He's the quote-unquote wow signing here. I think he's going to have an impact for sure during the regular season especially, but I think some of these other guys, some of the younger players they're able to get on those 2-year veteran minimums with player options, very important to note quickly though that if they would have signed him for a normal 1-year veteran minimum, the league would have paid it. Instead, they gave him 2 years, which means the team themselves have to pay it. And due to that, they actually drove up their tax bill quite significantly with all of these signings. So that is something to keep our eyes on. How long is Matt Ishbia going to be willing to break the bank open spending on this roster? But if the goal is to win, the Suns got a lot better this offseason with some of these signings. So I think that they did very well for themselves. Definitely would classify them as a winner. And then we have the biggest losers here. Not long-term, the Portland Trail Blazers right now. This is about as bad as it could have gone for them. Losing Damian Lillard here to a trade request isn't even the bad part in my opinion. I think losing Damian Lillard, it's tough for the franchise. I know fans are going to be sad. Trust me, it's a hard time in Portland. I'm not trying to say, oh, it's good that Damian Lillard asked out. But if you're asking me what's the best case scenario for this team 5 years from now, it hinges on a Damian Lillard trade. And the fact that Damian Lillard took the pressure off of them, took the decision out of their hands and said, trade me, it opens them up to a really good opportunity to rebuild the team around Scoot Henderson, Shaedon Sharpe. I think that's a huge home run for the organization long term. The only issue, though, is they gave Jerami Grant a 5-year, $160 million deal. That's a massive overpay. I've been foreshadowing an overpay like this for months and months and months on the channel. They went out, they did it. The next morning, Damian Lillard gives them a trade request. And you can't back out of a deal. You can. You know, technically you can. The rules allow you to do it. It's a moratorium. We saw DeAndre Jordan back out of the deal with the Mavs like a decade ago now at this point. But backing out of a deal with Jerami Grant because of Dame's trade request would leave a really bad impression on not only Jerami Grant, but also his agent. And around the league, a lot of people would say, wow, that's not a good look for Portland. And I don't think you want to, especially as a younger front office with Joe Cronin, Mike Schmitz there, you don't want to leave that impression on other players, other teams, other agents. So because of that, they're going to go through with that Grant deal, which is a massive overpay. It was an overpay even with the assumption Dame was there. But now without Dame, it looks even more questionable. The big question is, are they going to be able to trade him at some point? My hope for them is yes. The Kings, I like what they did as well. The most important thing, you don't even see it listed here on the screen, is renegotiating and extending with Domantas Sabonis. They get him locked in. There's no risk of losing him now in free agency a year from now, which is very good for the organization. They also got Trey Lyles back on a pretty fair deal, I would say. Maybe a little bit more than I was expecting for him. I thought maybe closer to $6 million annually, but again, that's potatoes. You're fighting over $2 million. It's not a big deal. Trey Lyles, good deal here for him. Alex Len, I think a good deal. Getting Keon Ellis on the two ways, solid value for them again as well. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Nehemiah Shkeda. I want to keep my eyes on that. They did lose Chimezie Metu. Not the end of the world. They also got Harrison Barnes extended on a 3-year $54. Again, maybe a little rich for my liking, but they've been able to accomplish all their goals. Plus, they're using their room mid-level to bring in Sasha Vezenka, former EuroLeague MVP, a guy who can cut, dribble, pass, shoot. Does a lot of nice things. I think he's going to fill in as a really good four-man as a floor spacer off of both Fox and Sabonis. Because of that, I think the Kings got better this offseason while maintaining and retaining most of their current roster. So they did a very good job. I would say that they're slight winners. The Spurs, they're doing exactly what I thought they would do, playing it slow and steady, and I think that's a really good practice when you have Victor Wembanyama now on your roster. Just be patient, okay? Don't push your chips in. Save all of your chips. Make a big buy when you're ready, and especially when Victor Wembanyama is ready, once he has a few years under his belt in the NBA. I think Victor's going to be great. I think Victor is going to be an all-star level player, but that doesn't mean he's ready to win an NBA title right away. And I think there's going to be a lot of learning, and I just don't think the overall roster is ready for that. They're very, very, very young, which is good. That's what you want to be. The timeline all meshes. They don't have to push in on a Damian Lillard trade. Now, if they do, it's going to make them very, very competitive. And I still think that there could be some real value to doing that as long as the price point is right for them. But ultimately, the Spurs are an organization that getting Trey Jones back, really good for them. Julian Champagnie, I thought, was a nice signing at that price point. Sandro Mamukelashvili, I know one of the Spurs fans' favorite since they picked him up from the Bucks this past season. All in all, I like what San Antonio's done. They've been patient. They are sitting out there with cap space waiting to help some teams out in trades. We'll see if something materializes around Tyler Hero, potentially as a 3-team deal. But the Spurs are very well positioned moving forward. And, of course, a lot of that hinges on Victor Wembanyama in San Antonio. Then we go to Toronto, and I don't know. You look at all of these deals, and I can't say I feel super strongly against any of them, but I think Toronto, they're really sitting really hard on the middle of the fence. And when you sit in the middle of the fence, you're going to have some pain in your rear end. And I think because of that, this team is a middling team. I just don't see this team being super, super great. Now, there's been a lot of speculation about Pascal Siakam. A team I would watch for is the Atlanta Hawks. But ultimately, Jakob Poeltl, 4 years, $80 million. It's a little rich. Again, not the end of the world. I would have felt more comfortable $15, $16 million a year for Jakob than 20. But again, just like I said with Dillon Brooks, look, listen, Jakob Poeltl, this doesn't hinder Toronto that much, especially as the cap grows. It's going to be okay. It's not the end of the world. Now, it's a little rich. I think it's an overpay, similar to how I felt about Dillon Brooks. But Poeltl's a good player, really good in-traffic rebounder, and I think that's a big thing for Toronto. Pivoting off of Fred VanVleet for Dennis Schroeder at the price point makes a lot of sense. If they would have given Fred VanVleet a massive 3 or 4 year deal, it would have potentially been disastrous for the long-term outlook of Toronto, just with how much money they've already got tied up in guys. They're going to have to commit more money to Siakam if they want to keep him. They'd also have to commit more money to OG Anunoby potentially, and then of course at some point in the rookie max extension of Scotty Barnes. So they just couldn't afford that Van Vliet contract. Pivoting to Dennis Schroeder here does a lot of the same things. He's not as good of a player, but he does a lot of the same things. And I think that for Toronto, yes, you got worse. I don't think you got significantly worse though. And I think that even, maybe a little bit more clarity of, hey, Dennis Schroeder's less of a scorer. He's got to get us into sets more. Van Vliet, there was times where he looked to be aggressive, and sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. And I think this way, if you do have Siakam and Scotty Barnes and OG Anunoby still on your roster, Schroeder can maybe provide as like that facilitator type. Not that he's going to hunt a bunch of assists, but he's going to get you into stuff, and you're going to get shots to those guys a little bit more frequently than just, say, a 27-foot pull-up three-pointer by Fred VanVleet in transition. Jalen McDaniels, good value there. Again, I don't hate Toronto's moves. I just don't know if I'm moved by them either with where they were at, which is part of the issue I have with that. And then the final team here to talk about up to this point, the Washington Wizards. Re-signed Kyle Kuzma. They traded away Monte Morris, of course, traded Beal, traded Porzingis. I think that pretty much everything that they could have done has been a huge home run for them up to this point. But at 4 years, $102 million, it's a good price point for Kuzma. I think that's going to be a movable contract. He got less than Cam Johnson, which I think is very important to note. On an annual basis, he's at $25.5 million. Cam Johnson's at $27 million. I think Kuzma is a very tradable deal. I think it's a huge home run for the Wizards. I think Michael Winger has nailed every single decision he's made since taking over for the Wizards. The only questionable one is Bilal Coulibaly, but I think if he lives up to his potential, that's going to be a huge home run possibly for them as well. So that's really the big question right now, is what does this Wizards team look like? Not now, but 2-3 years from now, it's possible we could see them trade Kuzma, could trade Poole at some point, and this Wizards team might be in the beginning stages of the asset collection haul, and that's really good for them. I'm very happy for the Wizards. I feel like long term they have a better chance at winning a title now than they did 3 weeks ago, and that's a credit to what the front office has done so far. Now there's going to be a lot of steps to get to that championship, but I think they have a better long-term positioning, which means, hey, they're going to bottom out for a little bit here, but they're in a spot where they can probably trend toward winning in a decent way going forward. So overall, I've liked what Washington did. I also need to talk about for the Milwaukee Bucks, they got Malik Beasley too. Malik Beasley, really good signing for them. On the minimum, huge home run. So I like that quite a bit for the Milwaukee Bucks. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. If you did, make sure to leave a like. Subscribe to the channel again for more content. Let me know down in the comment section who are your big winners and losers of NBA free agency up to this point. Let me know where you think James Harden and Damian Lillard are going to go via trade. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.